Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining me on Culture Chat today. It's an honor to sit down and talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, I was very excited when I saw this long list of public service and the work you're doing and how passionate you are, and I'm just really excited to talk to you about all of it today. So the big one on your list right now, and for the last almost 2 years now, of course, has been the Women's March, and you are the co-chair for the Women's March in Central Florida.
Yes.
This movement is something that, of course, I'm personally excited about and have been on board with, and was just supercharged from seeing that, just the crowds, the momentum, but also just, everybody all together. It's been a long time, I think, since I've seen something like that has not lost its momentum and has also been so meaningful. So can you tell me a little bit about, one, how you got started into it, and and what's going on with it now?
I had a background in social work and advocacy, and we moved to Orlando, and Trump won. And
Yes,
then
I'm aware.
And I'm a Latina, and I have I have friends all over, as a lot of social workers do, in a lot of diverse places, and a lot of people that I want to protect and that I want to advocate for. And the Women's March lets me do that.
Yeah, and so where are we at with that today? Because I know that also, even as recent as the March for Our Lives, I realized the Women's March actually helped kind of propel that. So people may not even realize that, these teenagers just got it together and moved on, but I think the Women's March...
Seriously, the teenagers got it together.
Yes.
We were occasionally asked our opinion and to give advice in organizing, but this was the young people. We followed them. That was our mandate from the top down, and it was not a hard mandate to follow.
Yeah, well, I actually had some kids on telling me about how and why and what inspired them to march, and just talk to different youths from around the country from very different backgrounds, and it has been really inspiring. But I didn't actually realize till I went onto the website to you do donations and whatnot, that it was involved. So did they approach you, or how did that work with
my planning partner for our? Oh gosh, this is involved, but okay, so. Our executive director lives very close to the Parkland High School, to Marjorie Stoneman. So she was there on the ground. Our Emma was with their Emma from the very beginning. And so with that in mind, my planning partner from the anniversary event from January 21st contacted me and said, can you help us with this as we do? Because I really, really like working. I like teenagers. I mean, some people just don't like them. I really, really, really just like them. I like the way they think. I like the way, I just love it. And he knows that. And so he had asked me if I would step in and do some of the help, especially managing the finances, taking in the grants, and then paying the bills.
Yeah.
So, but the students themselves are the ones who did the lineup and the speaker lineup. They chose the speakers themselves. And we did not. I mean, there were times when we said, well, maybe you want to think that, and sometimes they said sure, and sometimes they said no, and we just went with that.
So it was amazing to see not just the amount of women and a lot of people protesting and marching and standing up for something they believe in, but what was amazing was the scale of organization. I'm a huge proponent of being organized, and I like everything to be orderly, and it was incredible to see on that scale something that could be so well run and organized, and when we're thinking about
a lot of moving parts.
It wasn't Angry Mob, you know what I mean? It wasn't anything like that. It was just like the opposite, but the same. It was crazy. So, but then with that, the March for Our Lives, the students could totally take your format, your template that you've done all the work to get in, and say, okay, now we're going to do it with this cause, but here's how we
execute. And that's exactly what we did.
Yeah, which was fantastic. So now for future marches and for future things that we all want to stand up and believe in, it's great that you've really kind of paved the way in terms of setting up what I consider to be like a template. So how did like all of that kind of come about to where it wasn't just, hey, let's just go march and show up?
Okay, so there was the national march and then the sister marches. I was supposed to be in DC for the national march, but I fell over my dog and tore my Achilles. So I ended up doing the Orlando one in a wheelchair.
Okay.
And then that's how I became involved with the Women's March, was with the groups that were going up to DC.
I see.
And then, so then I stayed involved. And I originally came into it through the racial equity group. And then I formed their voting group. And then I became co-chair.
Okay.
And so it's also, so then we find out in Detroit, a lot of us were in Detroit for the Women's Convention. And we found out that there was going to be, there was going to be an anniversary event. And originally it was sort of loose, like do something. You decide what you want to do. And then it was, well, do this. So, we picked a national theme, which was voting. But we in Florida had already picked our state theme as being the needs of our sister islands, so we just combined that. We had 4 events across Florida. The Central Florida Lake Eola event was mine. And then I went to Mitch Emerson, who at the time was with For Our Future, and I said, oh my God, they want me to do this, and they think 5,000 people are going to come, and I've never done anything this big before in my life. I did a 1,000-person event when I lived in Princeton, but this was really a lot bigger and new because I didn't have last year's book.
Right.
And so he had a lot of experience, and he pretty much told me, well, this is what we have to do, and this is the order we would do it in, and I did it. And again, it was sort of the same dynamic we had with the kids, where Mitch would say, well, if it was me, I would do this. And I'd say, that's nice, I'm not doing that. And then other times I would call him and say, oh my God, I should have done what you told me to do. You were so right. But so yeah, it's just having somebody with more experience. And that's how it happened. Basically, I had a mentor who had more experience, who could lay out the what should I do, and I've done a lot, so there was nothing I couldn't do if I knew what I was supposed to do.
Right. And it hasn't really lost momentum. So like I said, obviously we had the anniversary march, but then you all helped support the March for Our Lives, and there's still things going on, because people think Women's March and they think, oh, that was that thing in DC where there's a lot of pink, and that was a one-time thing for those that are, kind of in a bubble, which is a lot of people.
I think for a lot of people it is a one-time thing where they come out and they scream and they wear their silly hats and they wave their signs and then they go back home. It's the challenge is getting people off their couch sort of year round. Mm-hmm. We have been one of the partners in the gubernatorial forums here in Orlando, where we've had Gwen Graham, we've had they've done it in separate town halls. So we had Gwen Graham, we had Chris King, we had Philip Levine, and we have Andrew Gillum coming up at the end of the month. So we're doing that. So and we're doing that in coalition with other grassroots organizations in the area. We are talking about doing something similar with our legislative candidates. So we're kind of looking at the idea that maybe possibly that would be our next thing. We have in other news, we have a June event coming up where we will be working with the Paramore, it's like a fresh food group putting together fresh food for the Paramore, because it's a Paramore district because it's a food desert.
Right.
So we have that coming up, and then after, because we do a monthly event.
Okay.
And that's June's event. July's event will be environmental racism. Mm-hmm. And July, August, I actually don't know, because my co-chair does every other and I do every other, so I don't know what she has planned for that yet.
What I'll do also though is like kind of link here in our my blog and website, so everyone can see and be involved and go out. These are events that are obviously open to the public, and that you encourage people to come out to and support. So Paramore, for people who don't know, and because this is national or international, actually it's a part of Orlando where It's in downtown, kind of, or just outside of downtown. You know, it's those streets that where people kind of get a little paranoid about walking around late at night. It's got a bad rep, but there's going to be you said fresh market?
Fresh food distribution.
Okay, great. And that's to benefit that district?
Yes,
Okay.
for the Paramore district. We will also be talking about Paramore and parts of Paramore in our environmental racism talk, as well as Puerto Rico.
Okay, so I'd like to actually talk a little bit about both of those, environmental racism and Puerto Rico, and kind of how they kind of come together, but maybe for our listeners, and so that I can have a deeper understanding of how you guys define environmental racism.
Okay, so there is a Wikipedia definition, and I looked it up.
Okay.
So you can look that up. And so there is. But for us, from where we're coming from, and this is consistent with that definition, is when there are, for instance, you find garbage processing plants. You don't find them in your well-to-do white neighborhoods. You find them in your depressed people of color neighborhoods. Always, like really, pretty much always. And so we have an area in here in Orlando where they've built there are air quality issues in Orlando anyway, but think about where they put the highways and where they put the roadways. They are not through the affluent areas, they are through the poorer areas. And so there are higher rates of asthma in children, there are higher rates of cancer, there are higher rates. We have hotspots all over the city, and we have someone coming in to talk about that and to tell us where those hotspots are and what we can do to help them make that better. But this particular triangle, the rates of childhood asthma are off the charts. And I grew up with childhood asthma. Both of my kids had it, and it's a scary place to be, to constantly fear for your children.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So how does that play into how you said Puerto Rico? And of course, I just talked to somebody recently, just on my podcast, about everything going on down there. And then right after that conversation, there were the protests, and there was it's like in the news. But apparently there's been issues there before the hurricane. And the only positive that I've understood to come out of the hurricane is awareness.
Yes. And that is, people say, what can we do for Puerto Rico? Well, there's all kinds of things, but one of the things you can do quite easily is to keep the island in the news, to keep awareness, to let people not be able to forget how things are there and how much worse they're about to get with the new hurricane season coming in. Puerto Rico, you have people who say, but it's not just the hurricane, it's been a bad 10 years. Let me tell you something. It's been a bad 120 years, actually 119 years. The history of Puerto Rico and the 300 before that weren't so hot. But
they've had a rough 400.
They've had 419 years. With the decimation of the indigenous population, with the introduction of African slavery, which is why we come in all sizes and colors. With and then the U.S. comes in, and it's an extraction economy. First, it's the people. There's the original Jones Act, which is 1917, something like that. And that is what imposed citizenship on the United States. The United States would say that the island, it was gifted that citizenship, but there was a vote taken, and by the lawmakers and on the island, they voted against citizenship, and yet they are. And that was specifically in writing. FISA documents are available to have extra bodies for World War I.
I see.
So when I say extraction, I mean the people were part of that extraction economy. When Hawaii got fed up with the way they were being treated, which was not much different at all to the way we were being treated by the same people for the same reasons, they loosened things up on the Hawaiian population and started importing Puerto Rican workers to be what amounted to slave labor.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So starting with the people of the island, it has been an extraction economy. And you go forward and you have the Domino Sugar, the sugar companies coming in and taking over the agriculture of the island in ways that did not benefit the island. Where you have, their primary export, but no social benefit, no financial benefit from that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go forward some more, and you have the Operation Bootstrap, I think, which brought the pharmaceutical companies
Right. Yep.
into Puerto Rico. Now, I worked for one of those companies at the beginning of my career, and I can tell you that they cared nothing for what they were doing to the island. I was responsible for communications of 3 of their outlets. And what that did to the ecology of the island, the dumping of chemicals and the manufacturing detritus was, and there was no care for that, because it's a given. Once they use that up, they just go move on someplace else and do it to someone else. You have what the military did on Vieques. I hear people, even people of my mother's generation, saying, well, the island was empty. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. It was not empty. They were told to get off the island because it belongs to us now. And the people who didn't, there, again, high rates of cancer. The euphemism is work-related accidents, so people who die in accidental explosions. All of that. But people stood up, and this is a good lesson, that people stood up, and they stood up, and no matter how often they were told not to, and no matter how often they were tear gassed, they kept marching. And now the military is off of Vieques, but 2/3 of the island are uninhabitable.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate. In my previous conversation on the podcast with Julio, he was explaining to me that, a lot of what you explained, but, that whole, like, people don't like to say it, but, it's a colony,
It absolutely is a colony.
It's not treated as an equal state.
Nope.
Citizens are not treated as equal
Nope.
citizens, and that even externally we see, but, Big Pharma came in and Domino, all these big corporate, and so.
Yeah, but they bring their management people, their good jobs, they import from outside.
Right. People think that it's bringing economy and growth, whereas it's like you kind of make it sound like it's pretty much just raping the island of its resources.
Because in building these facilities and in destroying the ecology of the island, they have destroyed the agriculture of the island, which means the island cannot support itself, cannot feed itself. We're seeing a lot of amazing coming back of that on Vieques, which is heartening, because if it can happen there, it can happen on the bigger island.
Picking up from, we're discussing Puerto Rico and the effects there. There's effects here also, especially being in Central Florida, being in Florida. You also worked, I think, on the Florida Immigration Coalition.
I work with the Florida, yes.
And there's kind of a Puerto Rico component with that. Maybe you can speak a little bit more about how kind of that plays into. So
Puerto Ricans are not immigrants. They are migrants. They are climate evacuees. And so but that migrant experience is still something that the Florida Immigrant Coalition is trying to help with. And so the component that we're doing in their university is largely the history. It's the causes of migration. Mm-hmm. Because the last great migration of Puerto Ricans to the U.S. was actually following a hurricane. When people say this is the worst hurricane in 50 years, well, the last big migration was after that one.
No, I'm sure that's not, a coincidence.
No. And here in Florida, here in Central Florida, we have the biggest population of Puerto Ricans outside of the island of Puerto Rico. And that was New York, but it isn't anymore. It's us.
Well, a lot of the New York Puerto Ricans moved
they
down
come
here
too, right? Yeah. And so there's a lot to do. There's just so many, there's so many moving pieces, because there's advocating for the island and for bringing back the island, and for the people who don't want to leave their homes. They're not coming here because this seems like a good time. They're coming here because they have very little good choice.
Yeah.
And so, but with our incoming displaced Puerto Rican families, we need housing, we need health care, we need mental health care, we need education. There's so much, it's so impactful. And then you have people who are going back. As bad as it is there, with no home to go back to, people are going back because that is better than this.
Wow. So, I guess you've been able to, being on the ground with it and everything, maybe meet some of these families that
Yes.
are displaced. What has that been like for them? And by the way, I'm happy to put anything here that people can do to be more involved and do more help. I mean, like I told Julio, I'm like, it's so cyclical, the news cycle. It's just in the news today, and then we've moved on because there's this one person that keeps taking up the news cycle with all
Well,
that.
there was another school shooting this morning
Oh, really? I was unaware.
in Texas.
Yeah.
Eight dead, as I understand it.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
it's unfortunately not surprising.
No,
And
and
that's
that's
the
what
sad
happens.
part.
Because
Yeah.
we're living in this time period when so many bad things are happening in the U.S. and to the U.S. that you get on a roll. You think, well, I got a year to get Puerto Rico at least fit for the next hurricane season, but then that becomes Parkland happens, or there's a Muslim ban. How can you say you advocate for everybody if you don't advocate for everybody? Women's March, we were part of the Rally to Tally in the wake of Parkland. And so, that was a drop everything. We're going to get 1,000 people to Tallahassee in 4 days. So, and that literally means dropping everything.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to keep up, and I just urge people and myself. It's kind of more of a message for me. It's like, just do your small part, and every day try to do a little more.
Right.
That's why I like having these conversations, because I think it starts with awareness and understanding really what's going on. That it's not just about, well, there was this hurricane and whatever. Like, to really get to the depth of the problem, so people can have empathy. But maybe you could share like some of the families that you have met that are here that have been displaced and then end up going back, or like, what is that really like for them? And by the way, if you know anyone that wants to come and talk about it, I'd love to talk to them, because I want to understand more. Because it's
Right.
one thing to hear, oh, it was terrible, there was a hurricane, I had to move to Florida, and then you hear about people, but really to hear their stories and how it affects them.
The stories and working with people who are incoming is so sad. My family has been able to stay there, and because we're Puerto Rican and we're not leaving, but also there's a certain amount of privilege in the fact that they have a home to stay in. And so my cousin's home is gone, but his sister, my other cousin, her home is there. He has a place to stay. So some people don't have that privilege.
Right.
And so we have a young woman who's come in, we've worked a lot with, and she has 2 little girls, and they are special needs children, and she didn't have a house. I mean, there was a hurricane, and then she didn't have a house. So she came here with her mom, and her little girls, and she is living in a hotel. I mean, honestly, I have vacationed with my children when they were little. I can't imagine being in a hotel with them for this long and still liking them. This is, and that's it. If
It's
you
a
have
small
no,
space.
yeah,
Like,
well,
you have to remember.
think
it's
about
just a
having
room.
no alone. I mean,
walls.
we say as moms that we have no alone time, but we are occasionally allowed to go to the bathroom by ourselves. But you do. You're in a hurt. Your children are traumatized. Her mom is with her. Her mother is crushed. Where do we get health care? Where do I put the kids in school? What accommodations are made for the fact that they don't speak English very well? Because they teach in English in the schools, but a lot of people send their kids to Catholic school or whatever, and they don't. The school I went to only taught in Spanish, and it was brief, thank God, and a Catholic school. But so they come here. Even Marilisa did not speak English very well, and so we, when we took her to Tallahassee with us for Latin Advocacy Days, she would speak and someone would translate for her. So, she's told her story. She's kind of the person who's willing to go and tell everyone the story. And it's heartbreaking, because there's nothing I wouldn't do for my children.
Yeah.
And I know there's nothing she wouldn't do for her children. And again, I say that from a position of privilege, and her less so. And we personally, our house burnt to the ground 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And
gosh.
yeah, when we lived in St. Augustine.
Oh.
Yeah. So, that, but you know what? That night we stayed with neighbors. The Red Cross came. They put us in a hotel. Our insurance stepped up. We got an apartment to stay in that actually I didn't want to leave when our house was finished. So it was that nice. Those are all, so that's of course a traumatic event.
Right.
But
yeah.
within the context of that, we function from a position of privilege. And right up into including that my neighbors were Puerto Rican, and so then just being with, culturally, being with in that was very comforting for me.
I'm sure.
And so, but Maria Lisa doesn't have that. She's staying in a hotel. She's staying in a hotel where she's resented for staying in the hotel. There was, I don't know if you saw it on the news, but when we all fought, Vamos for Puerto Rico. We did a lot of actions to get the extension of the FEMA, the vouchers for housing.
Yeah.
And the first one we got was only till May something, and now we have it till the end of June. And even that's a Band-Aid, but at least we have time to work with it. But so the day after the May 31st extension, the hotel where Maria Lisa was staying kicked her out anyway.
Wow. Yeah. And then she has...
And then where's she going to go?
Yeah.
Where's she going to go? Who's she going to call? So she calls Erica, who's our fearless leader at Vamos for Puerto Rico. And Erica's, on the ground, and she's calling everybody and march and make calls and call this one. And they showed up uninvited at something Bill Nelson was doing. And to be fair, within 20 minutes, he had her back in a hotel. But what if we hadn't built those relationships first? What if he hadn't been accessible because he happened to be in town at this thing that they could show up at?
Yeah, he's not always in town.
Right, exactly. What if he was having a bad day and he didn't do it?
And this is just one family.
Right, and this is one family. We also have 2 weekends ago, because time munges, I can't remember if it was last weekend or the weekend before, we had, FEMA has a problem. FEMA has many problems, but one of FEMA's admitted problems is that they don't function well with instances of domestic violence.
Right.
So if you are, what I was told was if you are still married to your abuser, they house you together.
Right. Yeah.
So then, what are your
terrible.
choices? It's not that everybody doesn't have choices, but there are no good choices there. And, if you care about your children having a roof over their heads, then maybe you stay and you get beat, because that's the rent. But with that in mind, we had a young woman, Maria, I think Santiago was her last name, but we called her Betsy, another person that had worked with us, and she, her partner shot her and killed her. Came to the hotel, shot her, killed her in front of their small children.
Wow.
So then what do you do? You
Yeah.
know, what happens to them now?
Yeah, this is, and it's like you said with your house, it's such a tragedy, but it's all comparison, it's all perspective, and there's
Right.
always somebody that has it much, much worse, and
And we weren't home. And our
right,
dog
nobody
came.
was
As I
hurt.
understand it, dogs sometimes don't come. They get scared. Our dog came when we called them. So from the dog to the children to the husband, everybody. There was no point at which I feared for them.
Right, yeah. And it's a very different thing to fear for the lives of your children.
Right.
Or those around you. It's a very different reality, so I can't even imagine. Well, thank you for sharing all of the stories. As unfortunate as they are, I think it's important that we're aware that's the reality. And speaking of domestic abuse, that's something you actually have experience with as well, because you worked with domestic violence
Right.
advocacy.
I was an advocate with a domestic violence agency in New Jersey.
Okay. Is there anything that us as, kind of the just common citizens need to know about domestic violence? Is kind of a stereotype or something that, we're not aware of. Because, of course, just like the Me Too movement, just like any other, person of color issue or whatever, everybody always just thinks, well, why doesn't that person just leave the situation? Or why didn't this person say something early, right? Like there's always that stigma that people
couldn't have been that bad, or they would have
people
left.
don't understand.
Yeah.
People really don't understand anything, I believe, until you're in it and you've experienced
Right,
it yourself.
yes.
But I mean, especially domestic violence, there is just this huge, I feel like a stigma and a stereotype of like what that really is, and that
Right.
my cousin who's a police officer, I mean that's like half the calls are domestic violence calls, and half of those are valid, and then half of them are just kind of out there, kind of crazy.
Okay, so the domestic violence crosses all race and economic boundaries. It's happening to everyone. It's happening everywhere. And then within that, the rates are higher among the police, they're higher among the military, and they're higher after a disaster. So, which isn't to say that brings it out in people, because people are who they are. But if you up the stress for somebody who deals with their problem that way, then that increases.
I see.
Really just believe the women. That's the thing. And we have someone running for office, for instance, whose wife, there are credible accusations, and he says things like, well, she withdrew her complaint. Well, a lot of us withdraw our complaints. When not withdrawing your complaint is going to cost you your children, or is going to maybe make things worse for your kids, then you withdraw the complaint. Or maybe you are so afraid of the consequences physically or emotionally that you withdraw the complaint. I had a client at one point whose husband actually paid someone to cut her head off. Not just kill her, cut her head off.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, but she spent a while in the shelter, and then she went back briefly because she was in the shelter with her little boy who had an ear infection. They didn't have a room to themselves, because the places are crowded. And so she went back. She went back for the best interest of her child. And so, eventually she left for good, but the average victim of domestic violence leaves 11 times before they stay gone.
Wow. 11 times. And how much damage is done before,
And who are you at that point?
Yeah.
Who are you? How many times? How convinced are you that you are a good-for-nothing stupid ass, that it is your fault because dinner wasn't ready, that if only you smiled more, he wouldn't have to beat the shit out of you. The
blame
and people don't, the blame and the internalizing of that. And then my first marriage, my ex-husband pulled me out of a diner in New Jersey by my hair. I had jumped out of the car and I was trying to call a friend to come get me. Not one person did or said anything to help me.
Seriously?
Absolutely.
Because they didn't believe you, or they're just cold,
it's
horrible people?
It's a domestic thing.
They don't want to get involved.
I don't want to get involved. That's between the two of you. That's, because also many of us have internalized that women are men's property. And so, you are his. And, who knows, maybe you did something to deserve it. Although what that might be, I couldn't say off the top of my head.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much there.
Yes.
Because it kind of crosses over that same mentality of naysayers of whatever cause, really. But very closely so to me, the domestic violence and the Me Too movement cause. Like, it's very so much that, like, disbelief in the woman or the victim, whatever that may be, the victim, and the lack of empathy. I just find it appalling that people are so afraid to get involved or to be, to put themselves out there. I don't know what that means to them, because I'm always like, man, you call me, I will drive over, and I'll probably be the one arrested for being abusive at that point. People who know me.
yeah.
But I mean, that's shocking. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. But I mean, is that also why you have these passions? Because you've been a victim before,
Yeah.
and you're also Puerto Rican. Of course, you're
Yes.
passionate.
It's
But I mean,
all of that put together. It is a lifetime of microaggressions as a Latina. It's the domestic violence. It's the acceptance of that by even members of my family. If I didn't make him so mad, he wouldn't have to hit me. It's the waking up to the thought that I'm not the crazy one. Like, I'm not the one who's flawed. The people who are behaving like that. And I remember, like, everybody says they know where they were when Kennedy was shot. I know where I was when my brother said, hey, you know you're not the crazy one, right? What a novel concept that was for me.
yeah. And was that a good big turning point?
That was a big turning point.
And it
for
is.
me.
One person just needs to believe in you, right?
Yeah,
So-
that was a big one. And yeah, and yeah, that's probably the beginning of the end of my first marriage.
Wow. And if you're uncomfortable, please let me know. But it's how long were you in that
Married.
situation?
We were married for 10 years.
And
it was, I mean, from briefly before the wedding.
wow. And that and you just did you just feel like all the things we just said, like you deserve that, or you caused it, or was there blame or guilt
that
or fear?
point, I did. I blamed myself.
Okay.
There had been an argument, and he had shut down, and I was pushing for a reaction. And I told myself, well, you pushed for your reaction, and you got it. So, but that obviously is not an appropriate reaction.
Right.
Stop bugging the crap out of me is an appropriate reaction. And so there are family things behind that put me in that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, there were just things, and he was always sorry, and he was, I believed him, and you want to believe them.
Right. Yeah. I think this is why I think it's amazing. Thank you for sharing, by the way. It's just that people don't understand, like I said, till they're in it or till they know somebody close to them that's experienced this type of pain. And I was wondering if there is anything cultural about that, right? Because there's very specific things in my culture, for example, that, you're very respectful and you have to kind of be, a certain way or whatever. Like, so I was wondering within your culture if you feel like there's kind of a way that the wife is supposed to act. Is that a thing?
Oh, absolutely. Domestic violence
overstep.
wasn't even illegal in Puerto Rico until 1993.
Okay, so this is,
I was already working as an advocate. And so, so there's definitely that. There's the machismo and the women are property and knowing your place.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I despise that phrase. And
well, you know your place now,
Yeah.
and it's a good place.
yeah. And so, I mean, even into like my current husband, who is, by the way, a very gentle soul. At one point, we were driving somewhere, and I said something, and he said something, and I said, "Yeah, that's my mouth. That's why I always got my ass kicked." He got pissed. He's never mad. He's Scottish, so he's level. And he pulled over, and he said, "No, that's not why you got your ass kicked. You got your ass kicked because he was an asshole."
Right. Yes.
I'm like, oh, well, yes, because that's what I would
You're
say
like,
to
"Oh,
somebody
I
else.
was kinda
And yet
kidding."
those words came out of my mouth.
Yes. Exactly, right? But it's different. We can all give other people really great advice
Yes.
if we can only follow our
If
own
only we
advice.
could hear
I'm super
ourselves.
guilty. I'm
Yes.
super guilty of that. So it's true though, but it's definitively an ongoing problem.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I mean we've touched on pretty much all the ongoing problems from the marches of Women's March. So we were talking
Yeah.
about women's rights.
they're all
March for our Lives.
intersecting.
They are, and that's the guns, and like it just keeps going with. I know that like those who have domestic violence, like they, in Canada, you can't get a permit if you have that on your record, and
Right.
whereas that's like most mass shooters have that in their background, and then we've gone into
In New Jersey, even if you're a cop, if you are convicted, and it takes a lot to get convicted,
Yes.
but if you are convicted of a domestic violence offense, you can no longer carry your weapon unless you are on duty. You check it in at the beginning of your shift, you check it in out at, and I'm just going to say, that doesn't mean they're not going to go shoot you on your lunch hour. But it is better. And I came to Florida, and the laws are so different here and so loosey-goosey. And just, I was when I lived in St. Augustine, I was getting my nails done. And a woman came in, and she asked to use the phone. And she just very calmly explained that her boyfriend was in Starbucks next door, and that on a job interview, I hope I ruined that for him, and that he was going to kill her, so she was going to need a ride home. And I asked, been there, done that, and she also, it was hideously hot, and she had long sleeves on, been there too. Okay. And I asked her, does he have a gun? And she said, well, yeah, I don't know if he has it with him, but I probably don't want to find out. And the owner of the place where I got my nails done, because it was my steady place, he's like, what should I do? Call the police.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the police come, they pull him out of his job interview, and they question him. And then they tell her there's really nothing they can do because he doesn't have his gun with him. And I said, okay, fine. Can you keep him contained or busy, while I take her back to her home to get her things? And they said they couldn't give her a domestic violence restraining order to keep him out of their place, because he had lived with her in her house that she owned, that she solely paid the rent on, because he had lived with her for 6 months and therefore had renter's rights.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's frustrating to me when laws protect those that maybe don't deserve it. It's just, there's so many loopholes. I can't... I don't even want to understand it. It's so frustrating.
And you get into layers of disparity. If you're a white woman and you make that call, there's a big chance they're going to ignore you. But if you're a brown woman who makes that call, that chance of being ignored gets bigger.
Absolutely.
If you're a black woman, if you're a fat woman, if you're a disabled woman, God help you if you were wearing a hijab. There are layers of disparity.
It's frustrating. It's definitely frustrating. You've given me a lot to think about, which is great. I like that. Let's actually talk about how this all kind of ties in, because you're a woman and you have been through a lot, as you've shared, from fires to domestic abuse to things I didn't even know before we started this conversation. And you are, an advocate for so many amazing causes and co-chairing the Women's Board. You're also working in state with education now too. But it's, what is it like for you as a woman of color, as a Latina, and just pretty much, you showed me your day book earlier today. What is that like for you to get up and go, okay, here's what I'm going to do today? And, what motivates you, and why do you continue doing what you're doing?
Some days I ask myself that question. Some days I ask myself, what do I need to tell myself to get out of bed today? And other days I can't wait to get up and save the world. I mean, I want to save everybody. I want to save the Palestinians. I want to save the Puerto Ricans. I want Myanmar. Oh my gosh, I totally want to fix that. I want to go to Puerto Rico, maybe give it a couple weeks and completely fix everything. And that's really, it's
maybe 3 weeks.
Yeah. I have a friend who tried to do it in 2 weeks. It didn't go well.
Okay. At least she tried.
She tried. And so, there's the need to, the feeling that people didn't stand up for me. And the need to not be that person. I'm very particular who I allow into my life, in the way of supportive people, and loyal people. And then, but the other thing is, that my mandate to myself is to be supportive and loyal. Yeah. And so that's mostly what keeps me going, is the need that it needs to be done. The idea that if you see a thing that needs to be done, it's your responsibility to do it.
Yeah. And because you never know who's listening, if there is somebody that is struggling with domestic violence, or, inequality, or having human rights issues, what advice would you give?
Speak out. Find your community, because there's a community for everything now. Be careful who you let into your life. But in a big way, speak out. This is not your dirty little secret. This is theirs. Out them.
Good for you. And so you have like I said, a whole list of things, and I'm going to link as much as I can. But what else can we be doing for Puerto Rico, and what else can we be doing looking forward into the stuff with Women's March? Are there certain events coming up that we should be aware of? Please share.
Okay, so we have our Paramore event, and we have our environmental racism. We have in September, we are either doing another candidate forum. I'm thinking this time women who are working on campaigns as opposed to the candidates themselves, or toxic colonialism. So I'm still wrapping my mind around which one of those I'm running with in September. In November, we have the criminalization of immigrants. We have the SPLC, FLIC, immigration lawyers all coming together to show. There's going to be a documentary and then a discussion panel afterwards. So all of them come down to how we treat other human beings, how we treat people.
And we can all do better at that.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah.
Honestly, everybody. I listened to a guy on NPR talking about how he still had nightmares about being a bully in high school, and his wife, he woke her up one night and she said, I'm done. I'm done. Let's track down the 2 women you were mean to. You say you're sorry. You're 70 years old. Say you're sorry and get over it. Yeah, so we can move on. I thought that was amazing.
Yes.
I thought that was just amazing. And then within all of this, I think back, did I do crappy things in high school? I totally did crappy things in high school.
Oh yeah, me too. My husband and I talk about that all the time because we're educators. We teach Kung Fu, we teach kids. We see so much through the youth, through adolescents, through young adults. I mean, we see so much, and we're like, man, we were probably major jerks also. I
wasn't like the mean girl.
Right.
But I could be mean.
Yeah, but we all have to look in ourselves and not be so judgy. But I think it's important that we go, oh, okay, well, we'll learn from that. I mean, all of us are completely human.
Right.
And within humanity, we're obviously not doing the best job we could be right now with the earth, with loving one another, with all of it, right? But so if we all just do a little bit to be a little bit better every day, maybe show up to one of these incredible events. And I think even if you don't feel like you can volunteer for anything, like these are educational events. This is just awareness. And I think we're all so unaware, so much going on. And I mean,
we try to, at our educational events, what we try to do is everybody leaves with a call to action.
Okay.
You go home, call your senator, say this. Mm-hmm. Or this last one, we had someone there with postcards to Rubio and Nelson with regards to the Jones Act. All you had to do was, fill it in, sign your name, and we're delivering them. So we have tried to have everything have a call to action. Our speakers at our anniversary event didn't go forward without its glitches, but we asked every speaker to end with a solid call to action. Leave here, do this.
Yeah, and you guys make it easy. I mean, there's lots of organizations, and I am all over the place. My hours are very limited, but I get an email, and it's like, blah, 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 blah. Do you agree with this? Hit this button, and suddenly I've written my congressperson.
Right, exactly.
Or if I'm multitasking, I'll call. It's really funny. I actually got to know one of the volunteers that picks up the phone, and it was like I was talking to them every week almost. They're like, oh hey, and I'm like, oh, I'm calling again to let you know that women's rights are being whatever. We have a
guy in Rubio's office.
Yeah, I'm sure they don't like to pick up the phone there. Actually, I've noticed they're not big on picking up the phone. You have to be pretty persistent. But I'm telling you, these organizations all make it very easy. Indivisible Central Florida is great because
my husband actually is on their governing board and keeps their calendar.
Yes, it's great because they send you this great wrap up for the week. You know what got done, what didn't get done, and what you can do. And I think that's perfect because that's my whole thing. I don't want to get 50 emails, and I try to have my organizations that I believe in, but then that one's really nice because you kind of get a bit of an overall look, and then what can I do this week? And you know what? I miss weeks. There's weeks I'm like, oh, I can't do anything, delete, but then there's weeks I'm like, wait, let me send this or let me get on the phone, so everybody can do something. If someone tells me they didn't watch 30 minutes of TV this week, then, maybe you're that busy. But honestly,
exactly.
We all
have that. Yeah. I used to fundraise for another organization, and one of the things I would tell people is everybody has something to give. If you have any comforts in your life, you have something to give. If you go to Starbucks, I don't care, you're online saying, oh my God, I wish I wasn't so poor, but you go to Starbucks every day. I want one of your Starbucks. Give me $5.
I know.
Knitters, because I'm a really committed knitter and I have a lot of knitting groups.
Okay.
And one of my things is whatever you knit the most of, I want one this year. So if you do dishcloths, I want $2 from you. But if you do $400 sweaters, several a year, I want one of them.
Nice.
Because everybody has something to give.
That's right. No, it's true. It's true. And, I think everything you said here makes complete sense, and I love the work you're doing. I respect the work you're doing, and we need more women and men, but more women.
Yes.
Being that this is a culture chat with me, I'm a woman, but yeah, and it's just, I think it's so inspiring, and I love having, guests like you on the show, because it really revs me up, and it keeps it in my, it's gotta be in your face, you know what I mean? And if it's not, it's out of sight, out of mind. And so thank you so much for sharing everything today. You've given me a lot to think about, and again, I'm gonna link a lot of those links here for people so that they can get involved too, and then maybe you'll get to meet Lisa at one of these lovely events. I'm sure she's on the ground.
According to my husband, I go to everything.
Yeah. I love it. Good for you.
He calls them my ambassadorial duties.
Okay.
But he's like, that's what I'm trying to cut down to two nights a week. But yeah.
Well, maybe it's time to pass that torch and, have other people step up.
You know what? Part of the reason, working with young people, and I work with a couple of, I mentor a couple of high school social justice groups. You bring up people because I'm not doing this forever.
Right.
And so if you are not, this was a big thing when I was with Johnson & Johnson, if you are not training your replacement, you are not doing your job.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for joining me on Culture Chat. It was a pleasure to meet you and talk to you today.
Thank you.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com, or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.